Yep, I think we are live on air. There we go. So I'm not sure whether we have anybody watching yet. No, we don't. Should I wait till we've got at least one viewer before I start introducing it? I think I will. Just hang on in case someone joins us. And if not, actually, it's going to be recorded, so I'll go anyway. Right, welcome to this live Google Hangout on the online course on community journalism run by Cardiff University. I'm Professor Richard Sambrook, who's the lead educator on the course. Sitting next to me is Emma Meese, one of my colleagues, who is the manager of our Centre for Community Journalism here at Cardiff University. And I'm delighted we're also joined on the Hangout down the line from Malaga, as it happens, Jenny Sargent, who's director of the Eyewitness Media Hub and managing director of First Draft News, and therefore an expert in issues of verification in social media, which is what this Hangout is particularly going to focus on. Jenny, welcome. It's great that you can be with us.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm delighted. I'm looking forward to this chat.
Good. So, as I said, this is supposed to be focusing on verification in social media, but I'm sure we will stray off into other areas. We've got a few questions that have been submitted in advance, which we may come to in a minute. But as I will repeat, you are able to ask questions through Google, which will come up on our screen, and we'll try and get through as many as get asked as we possibly can. But I wonder, Jenny, if I can start with you, given it is your area of specialism. Why is verification, particularly in the context of social media, being talked about so much and increasingly important? Because, of course, in any form of public communication and any form of journalism, whether it's got a capital J or a small j, making sure things are right and accurate and so on has always been important. But there's a particular focus on verification at the moment, isn't there? What's all that about?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing to pick up on, first of all, is this new term, eyewitness media, which is very relevant to why verification is so important. And we describe eyewitness media as anything captured by a member of the public who's sort of unrelated to a newsroom, who happens to be at a newsworthy event. So it's that kind of eyewitness, spontaneous capturing of video, increasingly video and images as well, which are then uploaded to, Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, WhatsApp, all of these, various shareable platforms, which means that there is no kind of control necessarily over where that's come from. There's no idea specifically sort of who uploaded it, why they uploaded it, and whether or not what they have uploaded is accurate. So it's difficult because actually there are many reasons to say, well, of course, no one's going to just post a picture to Twitter that isn't true. But I talk about the 3 M's, which is misattributed content, manufactured content, and manipulated content. So there's lots of different reasons why somebody might post an image, whether they've sort of photoshopped something that actually was genuinely a true image, but then to kind of manipulate the news agenda, they've perhaps photoshopped something in or out. So that obviously is a really important thing to verify. If that's just appeared in your Twitter feed, you shouldn't trust immediately that photograph is genuine. Misattributed is, of course, when a genuine photograph, let's say from the London riots, for example, off the top of my head, that there's many images that emerged from that event that are still now repeatedly circulating online whenever there's any kind of mass crowd event. So, it was a genuine photograph in the first instance, but it's been misattributed to a different event. And it's very easy to get caught out on that, particularly if you're reporting a kind of breaking news event and you're in a hurry to search for photographs perhaps to illustrate your piece. And then there's the manufactured, which is a very difficult one to verify, but important nonetheless, where there are certain groups who will deliberately stage a photograph or a video in order to, kind of manipulate the news agenda again. So they're the sort of 3 M's that I would always say whenever anything is shared online that claims to relate to a news event or claims to be newsworthy. You have to go through those verification checks to ensure that you're not reporting misinformation. Because again, on social media, once you report something or once something is reported or is false, the speed at which that can then kind of virally travel is terrifying, and it's very difficult, even once you've debunked the fact that it's not true, to take that control back.
So, I mean, for people on this course who are thinking about or possibly running a community news site or a hyper-local, I mean, all of that sounds pretty technical and pretty kind of, big scale. I mean, how simple is it to verify? What are some of the basic things from the point of view of a community journalism site or a hyper-local site? given what they may run up against? What are some of the basics of verification that people need to think about?
Well, hyperlocal sites are in a great position because obviously they know their patch, as it were, pretty intimately. And the first issue with verification is obviously, does it feel true? Does it look true? Is it too good to be true, for example? So very often, if you don't have somebody on the ground and something is claimed to have happened in your local area, the tools that you need to use are the same tools that you would use in kind of other forms of journalism. So Google Maps, reverse image search. These are like the example I just discussed, which is the misattributed content, so a real photograph that's been attributed to a different event. If you use Google's reverse image search, you immediately see that image relates to a different event, and you can do that in 20 seconds, we say. So that's a very quick and simple one. And it may be that something's happened in your area, but you're not physically able to get to that location, or you don't have anybody on the ground who can physically get to that location. And that could be a local fire, or just somewhere's being evacuated. Really quick, easy checks just to make sure that what you're finding, that what's emerging online, isn't perhaps attributed to the right event. So the other thing that I'm hoping we'll also have a chance to delve into today is the news gathering aspect, because they're all sort of tied in together. So if you're finding this information online, then there are different verification checks to make. If obviously that information has been phoned into you, then you perhaps will have a different process of how you would verify it in more traditional ways. But if you're searching online for newsworthy content, then you have to be able to verify online as well. And there are many quick and easy tools. There are also lots that take a little bit of practice, but nothing is too tricky.
Okay, we'll come back to news gathering. We're sort of doing this in the wrong order in a way. We'll come back to the news gathering points in a minute. Emma, you work with a lot of the kind of community sites around Wales, where we're based. Is verification, is checking on accuracy, is that something that they come up against? Is it a real issue for people to try and work out?
To be honest, a lot of it is it is not so much of the sort of from the sites that we deal with, because of the kinds of stories they cover, and in fact they know the patch really well, and it's quite easy to jump in the car and check if you've got a really small patch, or you know the person. It's word of mouth, so you can always check with somebody. But there are really easy ways of doing it, the way Jenny was just saying. So in a previous life, when I was a social media producer for BBC Wales, it was my job to sit there and verify stories. And even though Wales is still a relatively small country, sometimes you couldn't just jump in the car and get to places. And Jenny was mentioning somebody was on the phone there. You just ask somebody, what can you see? What's the weather like? And you can just open up Google Maps, and you can do Street View, and you can see, can they actually see what they say they can see? It's really simple, an easy way to do that. But actually, from the sites that we come across, a lot of the stuff, because they are in their own communities, it's quite easy to check that out anyway.
Okay, great. We've had quite a few people join this hangout. Welcome, very good to see you. So I'll just do a quick recap. I'm Richard Sambrook, I'm Professor of Journalism at Cardiff. Next to me is Emma Meese, who's Manager of the Centre for Community Journalism here at the University in Cardiff. And on the line is Jenny Sargent from Eyewitness Media Hub and First Draft News, who is a specialist and expert in online news gathering and verification. If you want to ask questions, you can do so through the Google interface, and they come up in front of us, and we'll try and answer as many as possible. We have got some questions that were submitted earlier, which we'll get to a little bit later. And if you can't stay for the full hour that we are going to be doing this live hangout, it will be recorded. It's automatically recorded, and there will be a link up to so you can watch it later on YouTube. So Jenny, let's just come back to the news gathering point. We've talked a bit about verification. Let's go back before that, as it were. What are some of the kind of basic techniques, again, focusing on people who are thinking of launching or just started a hyperlocal or community site? What are some of the news gathering elements online and through social media that they ought to be thinking about?
Well, I think the key to this is preparation, and it's kind of creating your own dashboard depending on the sites that are relevant to you in your region. Because obviously, depending on where you are in the world, there'll be certain social networks that aren't relevant or aren't as popular as there are in other places. So the first thing to do is kind of, ask around and get a sense of where the people within your community, the people you're trying to reach, what platforms do they use? And once you know that, you can start that. Every platform has a sort of clever way of searching or keeping track and monitoring what's happening. So anybody who wants to track what's happening on Twitter can create Twitter lists. We have more information on how to create those and what you need to do, which we can share after the hangout if people are interested. But also using TweetDeck, which is a Twitter monitoring dashboard, where you can actually search for specific terms for specific users. You can really kind of filter down, and that way you can set up notifications and alerts. So as you're going about your normal working day, if you've searched for the word evacuate or fire or explosion or any terms that people are likely to use in a tweet, you can keep track of that and have an alert that anytime anything like that happens in your area from the list that you've created, you'll be alerted. So immediately you can see what's happening. Another really obvious thing is obviously to follow and create lists of the emergency services in your area, any kind of local community organisations. And a smart trick I would always say is to join as many Facebook groups of your local community organisations as you can. Be very transparent who you are, what you're interested in, because the more that you can engage with people at that level and just say, hi, I like to report on this area, we're choosing to cover what's happening in our area, hope you don't mind me joining this group. You don't want to go in and be seen that you're a reporter kind of going undercover, but very often, you would be welcome into those sort of groups, which means that as and when things emerge, whether it's a extreme weather event or something where people are kind of, sharing with each other, you'll generally be more involved in those conversations than sitting separately, at your desk. So there's also tools, for example, for Instagram. There's most posts are geolocated on Instagram, so you can, if you hear that something's happened in a specific part of the region that you cover, you can search that location by sort of geographically, and that will show any photographs that are being posted in real time from that place. So if you're hearing rumours or you've found something on Twitter, it's kind of layering up, I would say. That's why the preparation is so important. If you can take the time to think about the search terms, the keywords, the local communities, the influencers, which is a pretty horrible word, but the people who are most prominent on these social networks within your region, you can find those and continuously build those lists, continuously build those contacts so that you can keep monitoring. Good old-fashioned Google alerts, but many people don't use those. You can set up alerts, so anytime there's a mention of your town, of a local school, of a local, you may never hear of it, and then all of a sudden something happens at the local school and you'll get an alert from Google saying that people are talking about it. RSS feeds, very old-fashioned, but many people still use them. I would create a dashboard using something like Feedly. Again, we can share all these links later on. But you can follow any of your local government organisations, people who regularly blog, anything that might be relevant. Hospitals, they all generally have a blog, which might surprise some people. But if you're kind of reporting on sort of government initiatives or anything that might not be necessarily tweet-worthy, not as dramatic as a breaking news event, but certainly very newsworthy from a community point of view, set up an RSS reader so that you'll be alerted every time one of these new blogs comes in. You'll have a wealth of information. The trick then is filtering it down so you're not overwhelmed.
Great.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I just want to add in there as well that when you're searching for terms, just really think about what we would put in a report if we're writing a report on a story, what somebody would actually tweet about an event or something happening. The language might be a little bit different. So think about, put yourselves in the situation of somebody who'd be writing a Facebook status update or writing a tweet, and just think about what kind of terminology, what words would they use. Because actually sometimes what we look for and what somebody would write is completely different. So for example, and again, thinking of search terms, I'm just trying to think of some stories we've covered before. If there's a flood in a particular local area, I wouldn't say my garden in Cardiff is flooded. So searching for Cardiff and flood or Cardiff and flooding wouldn't bring up the search results if somebody just gone, my garden's flooded or my garden's underwater. So it's important in this week in the stages we do Twitter advanced searches, which takes you step by step through how to actually geolocate as well. So if you are putting in a place name as well as a search term, it doesn't always return all the results, whereas if somebody's got location services on their desktop or mobile device. But just think about the keywords, and for example, if somebody's stuck in traffic, in a traffic jam, because there's been an accident further up, with somebody further back in the traffic jam might not know what's caused it. So they wouldn't say accident, they would just say, I'm running late, I'm stuck in traffic. So think of late traffic and then geolocate your search within that area. And so just think about things that somebody's going to be running late for or delayed, and the words they use, and that really helps you get a much better result.
Be conversational.
Yeah.
So again, for people who are joining us, this discussion is very much focused on social media. and on news gathering and verification. There are, of course, modules on these issues as well within the course. So if any of the terms we're using are a little bit new to you or strange to you, you can go back and look at the modules we have in the course, and hopefully that explains it sort of from a beginner's point of view as well. But we've got the expertise of Jenny on the line and Emma next to me, so we're going to be exploring this a little bit further. But first, we have had a question submitted. People are obviously welcome to submit questions on any topic, not just on social media and verification, which we're trying to focus on in this session. And Francia Herrera has asked about engagement, basically. Which considerations should be taken in order to educate members of a community to be active and to collect information related to their location? In other words, how do you engage your community and how do you encourage them to contribute to your site and to your hyperlocal? I don't know, Jenny or Emma, have you got any thoughts on how do you encourage people to take part and join in, basically?
It's just making sure that they know, actually, I'm going straight from this to another community meeting now where we are doing exactly that. So we're starting working with a hub in a suburb of Cardiff called Grangetown. And the first thing we did was call a public meeting. And we kind of said, this is, news for your community, by your community, and come along to learn how to get involved. So, and that's the first thing, is really good thing to do, is just to call a public meeting and explain to people, be transparent exactly what you're doing, what your aims are, and how actually, if you don't have the help of the community, it's very, very difficult to make this service work for your community. So, and so what we did is we've already held a public meeting, and straight after this hangout, I'm going off to another one. So people are really interested now in coming along. We're going to just look at issues. So we're going to discuss issues that are important to the community. So, there's no point in you providing a service for a community talking about things that you're interested in or things you think they're interested in. You need to make sure that your community is interested in the same subjects as you and the same topics. So, so getting people together, asking them, and then playing to their strengths as well. So what you'll find is that you need different people with different skill sets, and make sure that you play to their strengths. So there's no point, if somebody's interested in photography, there's no point asking them to write a lead story for you every week. So think about, what do you need? And it's important to think about the people as well. You might not necessarily associate with a hyperlocal, especially a digital one. It's really important to have people who are just interested, for example, in IT skills, and maybe setting up a WordPress site, because guaranteed it's going to be a Saturday night or late on a Sunday when you can't get hold of anybody and your website goes down. To have people on your team that have got those kinds of skills are really important as well. So make sure that you know what you need from people, and really sell to them how they get involved and what's in it for them as well.
Jenny, any thoughts on how you encourage people to join in?
Yeah, I mean, a really simple way is to invite them to set you assignments. So ask them what they want you to report on, if that makes sense. So rather than saying, we're here to serve you as a community, say, we're running, once a week we want to run a story that's relevant to you. What do you want us to cover? What do you wish we were talking about? What's driving you crazy? That you'd like us to investigate. And sort of, if you ask those questions, then you're more likely to get a response. I think just what Emma says is exactly right. Obviously, letting people know that the purpose and what kind of is motivating you to run the site in the first place. But in addition to that, I think it's just important to help people get in touch with you and make sure that they know that you're listening. So, if you just have a website, very often that it's very one way. So people will read what you're writing, but you've got no way of them then submitting a question to you, or, perhaps kind of engaging with what you've written, which is why social media has made such a transformation in terms of community journalism, because it allows the opportunity for people to respond to those pieces. And that doesn't necessarily, obviously it's very contentious about whether or not you would include comments on your website or not. They can be, there are for and against arguments. But if you have got the capacity to moderate either a comment section or a social media feed, where if you're saying to people, please let us know what you want us to report, make sure when they do write to you that you respond. And it's a very obvious thing, but if you run a Facebook page and they're posting asking you to listen, you must let them know that you've listened and that you've responded, even if it's a story that you're choosing not to cover. If you want to engage and if you want them to participate in the journalism that you're creating, then you really have to keep that conversation going and make it as easy as possible, regardless of their age or their financial situation. Make sure you include a postal address and a WhatsApp number and a Twitter account and a Facebook page, depending on your own kind of abilities to manage all of those. There's no point just having a phone number and assuming that everyone will want to contact you that way. WhatsApp can be really beneficial if that's the way they communicate on a daily basis with their friends, they're much more likely to share that story as and when they see it if you provide that number for them. So just kind of thinking of ways that they can get in touch with you is important.
I always say social media is called social for a reason. So you've got to be social, try to be a good guest at the party and join in the conversation and feed the conversation. Don't sort of close down discussion and don't stand at the edge and not take part.
Yeah, one of the other things is just thinking about, Jenny mentioned older members of the community or people who maybe aren't as well connected with IT, is just we've asked in the community when would they value a suggestion box. So in the library, in the doctor's waiting room, there's going to be suggestion boxes. Somebody can literally just write down their story or their information on a piece of paper and pop it in there, and somebody's going to go around and collect them to make sure the voices from right across the community are included as well.
Great. Now we have one more question online, but I'm going to come to that a little bit later because we had some other questions submitted in advance, which are also around this area of engagement. It's not quite what we said we would focus on in this discussion, but nevertheless, it seems to be what people are interested in. So I'm going to get all of these names wrong because they're all international names. So I apologize if you're watching this and I've got you wrong, but Silvanus Tonkut, Neba Julius, and Mumata Pelo Mafatle, I think that's right, but I'm sure it's got those wrong somewhere or other, so I apologize. But anyway, they're all asking about how you can engage the youth or younger members of the community, because obviously that's the future for a community, and they particularly want to use the opportunities of community journalism, hyperlocal sites to try and engage with the younger generation. Any particular thoughts on how you can try to draw in a particular section of the community, and particularly in this case, the young?
I think it's really important to know, again, you mentioned WhatsApp there, natively, what young people use on a day-to-day basis. So what's their go-to? So if you think about, we're creatures of habit as humans. We don't change our habits that much. And social media is just a tool. We're still people that do things that we do every day. So we hang out in real life in different places. Some people hang out in the leisure centre, some people hang out in church, some people hang out in the shopping centre. And online, we hang out in different places. So your audiences are in a different place as well. So some people will hang out more on Facebook, some people hang out more on Twitter. And then there's the dark web as well, which seems to be really popular. So by the dark web, I mean where you're online and you're connected, but it's not anything unless you're invited into that group. So Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, Snapchat. So these are kind of more the dark web. So it's kind of really knowing where your audience, where do your young people in your communities hang out. Now, some of them in some international communities still use text. So it's finding where they're comfortable and where they normally have conversations and how you can be a part of that conversation. And then on top of that, again, making sure that you listen to them, you make sure that they have a voice and that you're not trying to represent them in the way that you think they want to be represented. You have to ask them and make sure they're involved in the process all along, but just make sure that you know where they sort of natively are comfortable hanging out, and don't try and take them from that space somewhere completely different. Try and make it work in a space they're comfortable in. Yeah,
obviously we're speaking from the perspective of Western Europe. It may be very different in parts of Africa or parts of Asia, but let us know, tell us. We'd be really interested to hear how it works where you are, and you've all got a bit of international experience, but these things do vary from region to region. Jenny, any thoughts on engaging particular sections of the community, or in this case the young?
Yeah, I mean, I think again everything Emma said is spot on, and just to add to that, it's considering how they like their content to be presented, and this is kind of throwing down the gauntlet somewhat, because it's definitely going to put a lot of hyperlocal editors out of their comfort zone. But I think there's an assumption that a well-written long read, or a well-written sort of 800-word article is wonderful, and why on earth aren't the young people engaging with my 800-word article? And that's because in many cases young people are responding much more to video blogs or much shorter, concise content. The BuzzFeed suggestion of doing things in 10 lists, top 10 things about my community that drive me crazy. It's kind of speaking in a language that the young people will relate to, but also presenting your content in a way you could write an identical, or you can cover an identical story in two entirely different ways, depending on who you're trying to target. So, and with the smartphone technology, there's a lot of forgiveness now about production values. I mean, Emma, I know, is an absolutely top-notch video editor and probably is driven crazy by some of the amateur footage that is, now emerges online. But there's an interesting development that we're a lot more forgiving of shaky footage or, handheld in front of us, on a homemade tripod in our bedrooms. For many young people, that's how they experience a lot of this online content. So if you can build that confidence, I'm not saying it's easy, and I know many people are probably cringing and hating me for saying it, but if you do have that confidence, you can develop that confidence to produce exactly the same 800-word piece, but perhaps deliver it to camera, think of different interesting ways that you can package that content to make it much more visual and to fit into every other piece of content that young person is experiencing online. Your 800-word article is probably going to stand out. And again, I don't mean to be patronizing at all to that sort of age group. This isn't to suggest that they wouldn't really enjoy a kind of really in-depth 3,000-word piece. Of course, there is a place for that. But I would just think if you're trying to engage, it's recognizing that nowadays many news organizations, many of the larger news organizations like Al Jazeera, for example, Channel 4 News, are making great inroads by doing short, shareable videos and quick, listicle content. It's worth a try.
Yeah, it comes down to as well how they access the news. So it's mobile devices. It comes down to the size of the screen and the fact that we tend to be doing something else at the same time. So the younger generation, the fact they're more engaged with video and mobile, because that's the generation they've been brought up with. So more often than not, so certainly in the cultures that we're predominantly familiar with, but as Richard said, if you've got different experiences, do let us know. But you tend to see people walking around like this, and that's why engagement on Facebook, engagement on Twitter, it's not by accident that you predominantly see images and videos coming into your timeline. It's because it's what works and what people engage with. So it comes down to, does it look good on a small screen?
Now, of course, during this course, we do have other modules coming up on how you can present content in different ways and use it to engage the audience in different ways. So that will come out over the next few weeks as well. I just want to turn that question on its head a little bit, because you've got one submitted here from Alan Clark, who says he's currently trying to set up a website and Facebook page for his local community. Great, Alan, to hear that, and I hope this course helps you. But he particularly wants to know some of the pitfalls in trying to engage the community and get them involved. What can go wrong? What should you not do?
I'd say make sure you've got enough time, because actually a website and a Facebook page are both beasts that constantly need feeding. And it's not something that you can just sporadically just throw something up on and then leave it. If you're starting to build an audience, then they're going to expect, on a website, they're going to expect some regular content. There's no point saying, well, I'll put something up now and then something in a month and then 3 or 4 things in one day and nothing for another month. You need to have some system, and that all takes time, and to make sure you have a good image and everything to go with it. And with Facebook, the key has to be engagement. So again, with Facebook, it's getting more and more difficult organically to be heard through the noise. So a Facebook page, sort of a website and a Twitter feed are easier to run side by side than a Facebook and, a website and a Twitter feed are easier to run side by side rather than a website and a Facebook page, because again, you need to repackage the content, think about how it gets there, be there to answer people. So for me, time, when you set up a Facebook page and a website at the same time, starting from scratch, you have to make sure you've got enough time and resources to manage them both. Yeah,
Jenny, any thoughts on things that not to do, pitfalls?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a really good question, because I think it's so quick and easy to set up a website nowadays. You could be up and running in an hour, but I think taking that time to prepare and think about what your purpose is. Are you intending to be just a notice board for your community? In which case, hugely valuable, really important, well worth doing. Or are you thinking about perhaps holding local authorities to account and really kind of donning your Sherlock hat and digging deep into, perhaps things that could be improved in your community? And there's a sort of great expanse of what journalism, you might be able to do yourself, what you would feel comfortable doing. And you could get yourself in some pretty sort of hot water if you start to what could be considered like just an angry blog of calling out all of the things around you in your local community that drive you crackers. And that might generate you a following of people who are equally angry and equally frustrated. But there's a lot to be considered about, what do you consider the value of your site? Why are you setting it up in the first place? What are you hoping to achieve? And what can you build up over time? Start with just a notice board, just be useful, keep people updated, but try to develop your tone. How are you going to come across? How are you going to keep that objectivity despite being very firmly ingrained in that community and it being very personal to you, which for hyperlocal is a really big issue, I think. You're often writing about things, about people you might know, about organisations you're very familiar with. So keeping that level of objectivity that comes with journalism is a struggle. So getting that tone right and taking time to hone it before you go all out and just launch 15 different articles about the things that you're finding frustrating locally. But that's not to say there isn't a place for that also. But hopefully, Emma and Richard will be able to guide you more in that over the coming weeks.
I hope so too. So but we're now about halfway through this live Google Hangout, and I'm Richard Sambrook with Emma Meese and Jenny Sargent. We are meant to be focusing on verification and online social media news gathering, but we're kind of drifting into areas where people are asking questions they're interested in. I may try and bring it back a little bit to news gathering and verification shortly, but we've got about half an hour to go, and if you can't stay with us, then the whole hour will be put up on YouTube. You can come back if you want to see more later. But there are a couple of sort of legal questions have come in. So we've got Grant Marshy, who's asked, if you publish something online that is a mistake, either because someone gave you the wrong information or you misunderstood something and posted it in error, can you just delete it and publish an apology? We have got a Q&A with our media lawyer at Cardiff University coming out with some basics around the law that you need to think about if you're going into hyperlocal journalism in a couple of weeks' time. But I mean, either Emma or Jenny, what's good practice, but also how do you protect yourself a little bit if you make a mistake?
It depends how big the mistake is. Obviously, if you're accusing somebody of committing a serious crime that they haven't committed or something that's really, really, really bad, then you don't want to leave that up there. But generally, if it's not too bad and it's just kind of like quite a small mistake or an error, then leave it up there and issue an apology, because more often than not, you'll find the cover-up is worse than the crime. So if you delete something and then somebody else is referring to it and you're scrabbling around looking for it, then there becomes this huge thing online where everyone's going, what was said, what happened, what was the mistake? And actually, it just seems much worse. It seems a much bigger deal. Whereas if you say, actually, the last tweet, the time was incorrect, or I misspelled the surname or something. But again, it depends on how big the mistake was in the first place. If you're accusing somebody of having done something absolutely horrific, and they haven't done it, then take it down. But then you must actually explain what the mistake was and why you've removed it.
Yeah, I think it's some principles of kind of good etiquette is if you've made a mistake, own up to it, apologise, explain what happened, and explain what you've done to put it right. And most people, I think, would accept that, hopefully. Jenny, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think your point about it being good practice, probably more than a legal issue, is exactly right. I mean, there might be arguments, particularly in different regions, about what's legally appropriate and what isn't, but certainly from a best practice point of view, transparency is an absolute must in terms of building trust as well with your community. The more transparent you are of your process of news gathering along the way. So, just very simple terms, we believe, or we've heard reports of, or we're investigating, are much safer than just making, concrete statements. And, the beauty of online, when you're writing online directly into your kind of whatever content management system you're using, if you have a website, then you're able to update, and there's nothing wrong with, putting a time against it and saying, okay, 16:57 update, we have learned this, we retract this, or, I think deleting is, as Emma says, in some circumstances it's necessary, but, we live in the age of screen grabs and screenshots, and everything lives online. You can't ever really fully be confident that anything you've posted can be deleted. So you're much safer either keeping it up there and then issuing a very clear statement underneath as to what's changed, or if you do have to delete it, a very clear statement to say why. Yeah,
absolutely. Let me just encourage those of you viewing live to ask some more questions. We welcome them on anything you like. We're going to get back to verification and social media and news gathering in a minute, but any topic you like, please ask some questions live and we'll try and get around to them. One more legal question here. Gary Gilliland has asked he'd like to know more about professional indemnity insurance, what's required to cover yourself should any legal issues arise in the process of your work. How far should you go in getting cover for an online community publication? Gary, that's a really tricky question. The short answer is I don't know. But as I said, there is a module a bit later on about the basics of media law, the basic principles around copyright and libel and things you just need to understand and think about a little bit. I don't actually know of any hyperlocals that have gone as far as professional indemnity insurance, MMA. But again, I think a lot of it is about common sense, really, and it also depends, of course, on the size and scale of what you're trying to do, about whether you should do that. It also varies from country to country. Here in the UK, it's true that if you are running a hyperlocal site or a blog, you can go under Impress and one of the regulators at very low cost, and that will give you a degree of legal protection in terms of if you get something wrong or somebody pursues a complaint against you, because you've got the shelter of the one of the recognised regulators, and they particularly encourage hyperlocals to go under their umbrella. So that's, if you're in the UK, something you might want to think about. Emma, any further thoughts on that?
No, there are some, and I know that some of them have got public liability insurance for when they go out, and they have an element of cover depending on what comes under their public liability insurance. But what we tend to do is, if people ring at the moment, is to say to go to have a chat with Impress and see what that cover. That's the closest we've got in the UK at the moment.
Okay, let's just try and get back a little bit to some of the questions around kind of gathering information and where you find content for your site and how you make sure the content is true and all the rest of it. It ties into one of the other questions that's hard, and Neba Julius again has come up and says, what is a community? We talk about community journalism quite often in terms of geography, a particular village or a particular couple of streets. But of course, community can be all sorts of things. It can be an interest or a hobby or a passion, or different kinds of community. Jenny, what about news gathering? If it's in a village, people kind of understand, it's about the fair, or it's about what's going on here or whatever. But different kinds of communities of interest, does that raise different issues in terms of gathering information and finding stories?
No, and actually the more niche, the better, in terms of, as I described earlier, there is an overwhelming amount of content online, and depending on how good you get at sort of producing searches with the right filters, then you could just end up overwhelmed. So the more niche your area of coverage, whatever you've decided to report on, the better. And then you can really tailor it down to kind of search terms. The Google Advanced Search is the best news gathering tool there is. I mean, you can use Twitter Advanced Search, but very often just learning the right ways of using Google, and you can put in keywords and location and language, and you can do site-specific searches. So you can say, please return all the information on knitting. That's just because I've seen a ball of wool to my left, on knitting in this location in the last 2 months, and give me images only or videos only and things like that. And it really, you can really get some sort of valuable feedback. I'm not sure there's huge newsworthy issues going on in the world of knitting, but you never know. But I think there are ways, searching within sites. Once as we discussed earlier, if you're looking for interesting content on your site, then one of the easiest ways is to use media that other people have already created. A really engaging site is full of engaging content. So images and videos and audio clips, that will lift your site from just being flat text. And it's very easy for you to kind of curate a lot of this content. That's a really simple way of becoming a useful resource as well as anything else, but then also being able to develop that as a story. So if you found a video relating to whichever topic that you're focusing on, you can embed that video very easily if it's been found on any of the public platforms, and then write around it, and it immediately lifts and illustrates the story. And sometimes you can find 2 or 3 and bring them into one article, and straight away you're becoming a really valuable resource that people will want to follow and keep up to date with. So you don't always have to feel that you're coming up with original journalism all the time. Very often, just curating well is extremely useful, particularly if it's in a niche subject.
I think that's the right word, isn't it? It's how do you make yourself or your site useful to the people that share your interest, whether that's a geography, a village, or a couple of streets, or whether it's a hobby or some other kind of interest. How can you make what you're doing useful to people, and then you'll build an audience?
Yeah, just making sure again that it's not stuff that they know already and that you're adding value. So why would somebody need to come to you? So think about, if I was a member of my community, what would I want? And it's not a case of talking at people all the time. It's about having a conversation with people as well and learning about them. It's an entire process of taking a bit of information, going off, verifying it, adding a little bit more, putting it out there, somebody else will respond. So it's not just a case of you just shoving information out there all the time, because again, coming back to what Richard said earlier, it's called social media. So when you're on your social networks, you know, in real life, we don't just walk into a coffee shop or a bar and just talking about ourselves all the time, about what we want and what we need, because everybody around us would suddenly kind of take imaginary phone calls and wander off and we'd never see them again. So online, people tend to think, oh, I've got a Facebook page, I'll talk about, I want you to share your news, I want you, I want this, I need. Whereas actually it has to be a conversation. So you've got to think about what value are you giving. So think about if you were in your community and you were to look at your website, or you were to look at your Facebook page, why would you go there? What information would you want or need from that service? You certainly wouldn't tune in just to hear somebody talking at you about stuff that you're not interested in. So it's just really simple case of doing role reversal and asking people in your community what they're interested in, and you know, things that are on topic. So if it's a school closure, or if it's, you know, roadworks or whatever it may be, making sure that you're talking about it at the relevant times and not just going off and talking about something completely different.
Okay, Grant Marsh has followed up with a couple of more questions on the legal issues. Firstly, he's asked whether the NUJ, the National Union of Journalists here in Britain, can help with insurance. I mean, Grant, they can definitely help freelance journalists find insurance. I suppose part of the issue is whether the NUJ recognises you and what you're doing as capital J journalism or not, or whether you want to be thought of as that. I would imagine they're being more open and flexible on that than perhaps they might have been at one time. But yeah, good idea to ask the local union whether they have advice and contacts that they can offer to help with insurance. And then you also asked whether other people who contribute to your site, whether you as the publisher are responsible for what they write, or are they responsible, and is there a way to define it? Well, because it depends what they've said on how serious it is and what level of liability and so on there may be. But if you are the publisher of a site, you do have responsibility for what is published on that platform. You know, if they've put their name to it, they will probably have some responsibility as well. So the short answer to that is that it will be a shared responsibility, I think. But certainly as publisher, you have to take some responsibility for the fact that you've put that information into the public domain. As I said, there's more on media law coming up a little later in the course, so I don't want to get completely sidetracked on that now. But again, there will be also links and other places that we'll point you to when we get to that point in the course that you can find out more about. So I would just say we've got about 15 minutes left. If anyone else wants to ask some questions, please do. We've got one that's been lurking there from away from Montse Sands. I hope I definitely haven't pronounced that correctly in one of those two versions. We'll come to that at the end because I think it's a great question to end on. So I haven't forgotten you. We will come back to it. Some of the other questions that were submitted in advance, and again, you're kind of getting ahead of yourselves because we talk more about it a bit later in the course, but it's how do you make a site sustainable? And of course, part of that is about whether or not you want to make money and how you make money. And oh dear, something's come up on the computer, so let's just, there we are, we're back, sorry about that. Whether you want to make money from your site and how you can make it, and we have a whole section on that coming up. But sustainability isn't just about whether you can make money. And of course, a lot of people launching community sites and hyperlocals, the motive isn't about making money. Some people do want to turn it into a business, but many people, that's not what it's about. Sustainability is about how do you keep it going? Because if you're one person operating this site on your own, you're probably going to fall over at some stage, because if it's successful, it demands a lot from you. So I don't know, Emma, first, you've had a lot of experience with starting up hyperlocal sites around here. What are the issues about making it sustainable, other than the fact you've got to think about a business model if you want to make money? But again, we deal with that in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah, and that comes, as you say, the question of sustainability. What is it? Is it whether you're financially sustainable, or is it whether you can actually keep the thing going and whether it's got legs and it'll keep going? It usually comes down to the people involved and the time that they've got, because lives change. And when people set up a hyperlocal, they might be in a particular financial situation, they might be in a particular work situation, and family obligations. And these things always change as time goes on. So what we found is that initially when we started setting up hyperlocals, we would bring a group of people together who didn't have any previous relationships with each other. They were just all really interested in doing things for the community. And what we find over time is that one person says, oh, I'm getting married, I haven't got time to do this, or they go off and have a baby, or they change jobs, and life gets in the way, really. So in order to have sustainability, you need to make sure that you've got a backup plan, so that if it is just you, what happens if you're ill or you want to go on holiday? There's a really good article on the Centre for Community Journalism website on, is there such a thing as a holiday for hyperlocals? Do you ever get a holiday? We hear so much about people sitting by the pool, sitting on the beach, and they've got their mobile device, they've got some Wi-Fi, they're kind of still keeping it updated. So it's having something in place that if that one person isn't available, and that you also have a tiered system where it's not so much of a bottleneck, because the other thing we've found is that somebody might be the editor and other people produce content beneath them. But then if it all has to be checked by that one editor, then you've got all this content left sitting there as well. So it's kind of trying to even it out a little bit more, making sure that you've got a few different people on different levels, or at least another person who has got the skills and the time and the availability to manage that should something happen. And just make sure that, I think for me, that from speaking to so many different people, what they say is that it shouldn't be dependent on one person, that as an entity, as a thing, it can be handed over to somebody else. And that's when you know you've got a sustainable product. If you've built in such a way, it's not just your personal contacts and your personal network and people who will only deal with you. It's the service as a whole, that if you've got a website or a product that you can hand over for somebody else to run, that is the key to sustainability.
And Thomas and Luca, who's asked one of the questions here, says, is the Bristol Cable here in the UK a model for community journalism, or are there other examples? There's no one model, really. I mean, some are one-person operations, as Emma said. Sometimes it's a cooperative. Sometimes it's set up very quickly as a commercial venture, and when it's successful, employing staff and so on as well. So there are lots of different models and lots of different ways of funding it. And as I said, we get into the business models a little bit later in the course. But Jenny, any thoughts on keeping it going and making it sustainable?
Yeah, I was sort of scribbling notes as Emma was speaking then, because I think that there's a sort of big elephant in the room, which is if you're the kind of person who's inclined and has got the agency to set up something like this, generally it's because it's something that you're incredibly passionate about, and you believe that you enjoy writing, or you enjoy reporting, you enjoy the idea of it. And it can be really hard to hand that over. And it can be really, if you invite people to write something and then they submit a post or an article and you think, God, that's not very good. I don't like that very much, or I don't think that's very well written. It's important to have that honesty amongst your team about what you're going to cover and what you don't. And I think having an early discussion with anybody involved and setting out some very basic kind of community guidelines or editorial standards, or just discussing as a group, what are we going to cover? How are we going to report it? Do we have the authority amongst each other to edit other people's work? A second pair of eyes is essential, even if you're the most seasoned writer, because you can make mistakes, there can be typos and all the rest of it. So, you really do need to build a team who not only respect each other, but feel able to say, I don't think that's quite good enough, or, I'm not sure that's quite true, or I think you might be a bit aggressive there, or you've been a bit confrontational. And all of those really tricky things to say to people who aren't necessarily work colleagues, none of you are getting paid, it's a voluntary situation. So without trying to be too negative, I think by addressing those issues early on and saying, how can we work together? We really all believe in this, but we might all have different skills. Some of us might be better writers than others, but others might really dig deep and get some great information, but just be happier to sit in the background. So kind of establishing where those roles will lie early on, and writing up a document from the beginning saying, this is our mission, this is why we're just a couple of lines that I know it sounds a bit sort of trite, but I really think it can make a difference further down the line when you're 3 or 4 months in and everyone's getting a bit stressed and feels a bit hard done by, and nobody really wants to have those conversations. So I think in terms of being realistic about what it takes, there's the time issue, of course, but there's also the sensitivities of personalities involved, which makes a difference. If you get that right, then you've got a cracking team.
I think that's really good advice. Yeah.
And there's one other role as well, which is a really important role, which is I kind of term it as a commissioner. So somebody who's very well connected in the community. They go to lots of meetings, they know lots of people, actually have got no interest in ever writing anything. I'm too busy, don't want to write anything. But actually to have those almost like evangelists, so people who know everything that's going on, and they'll be down the local shop and they'll hear some piece of news and they go, that would be really useful for whatever hyperlocal site. Why don't you write a piece for them, or why don't you let them know? And then at the next meeting you can go, well, they'll chase them up for you. And we have found that having people like that are really important. People that know your community incredibly well, have no interest in actually participating hands-on, but are just there to kind of make sure that you're not missing out on stuff in the community.
And can connect you, yeah. Okay.
Sorry, Richard, I'm going to add very quickly to that. This is such a good conversation. I think I would just say as well, the outreach element is crucial, because I think so many sites fall down because they look 3 months in and say nobody's reading, nobody cares. And it's not necessarily that nobody cares, it's just they haven't found you. And it's not that easy to be found online. You know, no one's just going to stumble across your website. There's very complex algorithms, whether even if you create a Twitter account and you have 200 followers and there's 200 people in your village, they're not still necessarily going to follow everything that you're doing. You know, you're not going to be found that easily. So having the patience and the sort of determination to keep going and look at those analytics, which I'm sure Emma will cover later in the course, you know, your Google analytics, Facebook analytics, and notice the trends, see, you know, what you can improve on, and recognize that it's going to take at least 6 months for you to get, you know, anywhere near the amount of views that you want. You've just got to be patient.
Okay, and picking up on this theme here, Sam and Kelly Walker, hello. I've asked a really good question. How often should you be updating your Twitter, Facebook, or website with new content?
There's no hard and fast rule, just regularly. So as long as you tell people how regularly, as long as they know what to expect. So it's better to put really good content up less regularly than just keep putting trash up and just posting on Facebook 10 times a day and just keep updating stuff, because it's going to get lost in the noise. And especially with the latest Facebook algorithm, they keep changing it and making it more complicated every time. So, you know, it's better to post one good post a day, which will drive engagement and will generate a conversation and will be of value to your audience, rather than actually to try and post 5 different things up there. It's good for you to have in your mind. Again, it comes down to resources. What can you manage? But, you know, if it is something that you post, I don't know, once a week on your website, I would recommend you probably would want to try and do it more often than that. But however, if you don't have time to do that, as long as it's clearly marked and people know to check back once a week, then that will be of far more value than you kind of pretending to be something you're not. And what we've found, especially with some of the hyperlocals we've set up, they're almost a victim of their own success, because they look good, they've got a nice glossy logo, and they're kind of, you know, on Facebook and Twitter and the website, and people think you're some sort of big media organisation. So it's better to be transparent, just keep saying we're a team of volunteers, we post as and when, this is our aim. However, if you want to help out, we would gladly accept your help, but just make sure that you kind of set your stall clearly, and there's an about section on your Facebook page. You can write in the bio on your tweets, you know, and if it's something that you don't keep updated on weekends, just say we post Monday to Friday, blah, blah, blah. But just make sure that whatever you can manage, do whatever you can manage, and whatever you manage, you signpost that clearly so that people know you're managing their expectations then, and they'll bear with you.
Absolutely. Okay, we've got a question here from Olga Garzon in Spain. So this is headed your way, Jenny, sitting in Malaga, I think you are, aren't you?
Yeah.
Do you see community journalism as an opportunity for local journalists to become self-employed and set up their own media, maybe with colleagues? Because lots of journalists are losing their jobs in Spain, and indeed here in the UK, unfortunately, especially in local media. So to what extent do you see community journalism as being a, you know, something for professional journalists who are, you know, moving on their careers in that direction? And to what extent is it something that can be, to use the loose term, amateur? What, you know, what do you feel about that? Jenny, any thoughts?
Oh, yeah, it is. It's a really difficult one, because there's so many opportunities to publish online in all the different forms we've discussed. You know, you can start your own YouTube channel, you can create a Medium blog post in minutes. You know, if you don't want to go to the levels of actually developing an entire kind of hyperlocal blog, as a journalist who wants to maintain maintain visibility, there are all sorts of ways that you can self-publish and very effectively and grow a really impressive amount of followers. And I think one of the oddest phenomenons of this digital age is that there are people who are so valuable to us as their followers, who we just assume will always be there, will always be writing, commenting, curating that really valuable information. And one day they could disappear, and quite often you'll see a sort of final tweet for them saying, no one's paying me for this, I'm having to go off and do something else. And you realise that actually, this is somebody that you followed avidly, and you've become really, really kind of dependent on their views and very familiar. So in one sense, I would say absolutely this is the best time ever to be able to self-publish in whichever way. And there are ways that some quite media or digitally savvy people are making the most of these new platforms. If you become incredibly valuable on Instagram or YouTube, that there's ways of making money, but they're very few and far between, but it's not impossible. But yes, the flip side of that is the more that you give away for free, obviously it's harder and harder to demonstrate the value of your work and try and sort of claim any payment. But I would suggest any way that you can show your value, particularly in an area that you're interested in. Of course, keep writing and keep posting and keep publishing, and hope that eventually somebody would recognise that. But it's a really frustrating issue.
I mean, Olga, I would say there's no right or wrong answer here. I certainly know of several examples of journalists who've been made redundant and have set up their own community sites and hyperlocal sites that have gone on and made a real success of them and have turned them into businesses which are now, sustaining them and paying their mortgage and are growing. So that's the good news. I also know of some journalists who've been made redundant and tried to do that and have failed. But I also don't want people to think about community journalism as being something that's purely in the realm of trained or professional journalists. The great opportunity for it is for anybody to have a go, and for many people this is not about paying the mortgage. It's about their passion for the community or wanting to contribute and being part of something else. So I don't think there's one answer. Sometimes it can work for journalists who've lost their jobs and want to develop their own media sites, and there are good examples of that. Sometimes people try that and fail, but hyperlocals and community journalism are about a lot more than that as well. Now, we're running out of time. We've got about 3 minutes left, and I do want to get to Montse's question because it's been sitting there from early on. I'll just check. We've had, okay, so Louis Adamson has asked, what's the best way of setting up a hyperlocal in an area that has no other local news sources? Well, I'll say, Louis, that you've got a fantastic opportunity if there are no other local news sources, because people are bound to want to know what's going on. So I think if you were to look at, what we've done at the beginning of the course about how to establish a site, how to research your audience, what we've been talking through this podcast about is how to find the information that your particular area and your particular community would value and get it out there and just give yourself the time and space to build an audience. So if there are no other local news sources, then as Jenny said earlier, you need to connect to the people in the community who have information. It may be the police or the fire brigade, or it may be community leaders, or it may be schools and so on. There are ways online and indeed offline of connecting with these people, building those relationships, finding out what's going on, and offering it out to your community. And if they've got no alternative, then I'd say you've got a great opportunity there. So we're almost at our full hour. The final question then I want to come back to one that Montse Sons, and I know I've got that completely wrong, so apologies, asked earlier on. He says, I want to know, how do you think community journalism will develop in the next few years? How's it going to progress? What are the tools we should use most frequently? So, we've been talking about just getting going, and community journalism is a reasonably new phenomenon, although it's been going for a few years. But I mean, Jenny or Emma, any thoughts on how you think this sector is going to develop? It's an exciting new sector, but how do you think it's going to go?
I'm excited. I think the fact that so many newsrooms have turned into global newsrooms, and obviously there's great value in that, and we can now follow news around the world on a broad scale. But what that does mean is local journalism, and particularly hyperlocal journalism, is very hard to come by. And I think there will be a real sea change, and there already has been. I mean, hyperlocal has been something that sort of developed year on year. There are more digital tools than ever before to help people do this. There's more information available and more support. And there's more public interest. There's more of an audience. The original gimmick of suddenly being able to connect and follow news around the world is, I think, beginning to sort of be reined back in. It's like, actually, that's all well and good, but what's happening on my doorstep? How can I contribute to it? And these smaller groups of really valuable, relevant journalism is something. I mean, I realise that I was quite negative in response to Olga's point about what's happening in Spain, but it's a great example of where, you know, there's so many smaller regions, smaller groups that can start to be covered that aren't getting covered nationally at all, and it's a really exciting time. It does take patience, it does take commitment, and often very early on there's no money there, but then I think it can only grow, and the audience appetite is certainly there.
I think there's always going to be a need for news, especially local news. We all want to know what's happening on our doorstep. So I think there's certainly, as an emerging landscape, there's, you know, we're seeing more and more hyperlocals come in. And what's really interesting is the experimentation and the difference in business models. So we mentioned the Bristol Cable earlier, this cooperative model where the community buys in and actually pays a subscription to actually buy in to fund having their own local news service. And then we're seeing a lot of them, like the Caerphilly Observer and the Talbot Magnet, are going back into print, giving the newspaper away for free, but because people still understand, advertisers still understand the value of, you know, my advert's going to go through 20,000 letterboxes as opposed to 20,000 eyeballs on the screen. So I think the really interesting thing is we'll be seeing the difference and the change in how quickly people grasp and understand the value of online advertising. That's kind of completely, that's for anyone and everyone. That's not just for community journalism. But you know, there'll be big changes if people suddenly realise that there's a lot of value in online advertising. But I think it's really interesting to see all the different types of business models and the experimentation that's happening at the moment. And we're also doing some work looking to the US and seeing what's happening there. There's quite a lot of comparables as well. So it's a really exciting time for the sector. Yeah,
I agree. Okay, our hour is up. David Martle has asked quickly, do we know of any European grants to set up hyperlocals? I don't know of any, and I haven't heard of any, David. If I find of any before the course ends, I'll put a link up or put an answer up, but I'm not aware of any personally. So that's quickly dealt with that one. Thank you very much. This entire hour will be up on YouTube for you to review and go back over if you really want to, and see our lovely office here in Cardiff. But in the meantime, thank you very much for your questions. I hope you're enjoying the course. There's a lot more content to come, which will answer some of the other questions that people have been asking about. But in the meantime, many thanks to my colleague Emma and to Jenny down the line. Jenny, thank you very much for giving up your time. Thank you for watching, and there'll be another hangout in, I think, a couple of weeks' time. So maybe we can talk to you again then. Thanks very much. Now I've got to work out how to stop it. Bye-bye, Jenny.